So in the latest issue of Australian Foreign Affairs, we look at the challenges facing Australia as tensions grow in the Taiwan Strait. We are seeing at the moment record numbers of Chinese military flights into Taiwan's air defence zone. We are seeing Joe Biden continuing Donald Trump's policy of more firmly committing to defend Taiwan. We're seeing a Taiwanese population that is growing wary of Beijing, particularly after the crackdown in Hong Kong. And all of this is presenting really stark challenges for Australia, which is what we look at in a number of essays in this issue called The Taiwan Choice. In a fairly bleak assessment, Hugh White looks at the separate strategies of the US and China, and he ultimately concludes that America is not going to be able to defend Taiwan. And this has grave implications really for the US position in East Asia and also for the long-term fate of the US alliance with Australia. Linda Jakobson looks at China's evolving approach and more assertive approach towards Taiwan under Xi. And she also looks at how Xi might increasingly pressure Taiwan. And ultimately, she argues that Xi may well move on Taiwan, but is unlikely to move until after the 2024 Taiwanese election. A piece called The Equation looks at the US and Chinese and Taiwanese military capabilities in Taiwan. And he looks at what a war would actually look like. And it would be potentially devastating, although there are various options for Xi Jinping in terms of how he would try to reunify with Taiwan. And ultimately, Brendan looks at some of the diplomatic options for Australia and how Australia might try to soothe tensions in Taiwan. The final of the four main essays is by Yuji Chen, and she looks at the Taiwanese view on all these tensions and looks at how the Taiwanese people view themselves today as a thriving, independent democracy. She looks at how really the fate of Taiwan has implications for the fate of democracies everywhere. And we also have a really fascinating piece by Stephen Zedzich, who looks at the torrid China debate that's been going on in Australia. And he argues that there's a generational divide that's prompting that debate. And that there's this increasing split between a sort of more hawkish, younger generation of analysts and politicians and commentators and thinkers in Australia compared with an older generation that experienced the changes under Deng Xiaoping. In the fix for this issue, William Stoltz looks at the growing threat of malware and how Australia could try to push for an international treaty to try to defend countries against malware. We have reviews by Kate Storr on the space race, by Andrew Ware looking at the invention and reinvention of Singapore, and Lynn O'Donnell, a veteran reporter from Afghanistan, looks at the fate of Afghanistan following the Taliban takeover. We also have correspondence and more. It's a pleasure to introduce the latest issue of Australian Foreign Affairs, The Taiwan Choice, Showdown in Asia.